Thank you for sharing that with us today, Dave. We are gathered here partly because we remember this story in our own lives and in the lives of those throughout history. And as we remember, I want to start off with a question. Have you ever been to a place or seen a picture that just feels special in some way, different in some way, almost like heaven and earth are holding hands, like there's just something special, a presence, a moment, an event, a person in which you can feel there's more than you might be able to see? I wrote a little bit about Holy Ground in this past newsletter, but I wanted to share and hear from you all. Who here has ever danced on a tile kitchen floor in bare feet? Thank you, right? Holy ground. Who here has ever visited the grave of a loved one and just had to pause for a moment and remember the promise that extended throughout the ages? Right? Holy ground. Who here has ever been to a wedding and seen tears of joy flow? Holy ground. Holy ground is not just locations, but it can be. And it's not just moments, it can be. Holy ground is that place, that threshold in which we go into a moment and come out forever changed. We go in one way and an encounter with the joyful love in memory of God's abiding presence is with us. And when we step out, the world's a little bit better, a little bit brighter. We might have a little bit more hope to face what we know is to come in our challenges. Holy ground is something truly magnificent, and it is all around us in this world. But for some places and some people, certain locations are like anchor points for generations upon generations. This is one such place. This is the top of the Mount of Olives. This is known as the Chapel of Ascension. It is from this place we believe Jesus offered that final blessing to his students. You see, this is a place that is surrounded constantly by change, by history, and by memory. This past Thursday is actually the Ascension Day. I believe it's also the day that we had a graduation happen. Is that correct? Yeah? It is a threshold moment for the disciples then and the students of today. A moment in which we go into the day one thing and come out graduated. The disciples have spent time from the Easter season all the way to this threshold moment, on and off again with their Lord, as John mentioned. And they're on the cusp of something new. A threshold is that entryway of a door that you have to cross over to go from one place to another. It is a portal. It is a moment of transition. So what has Jesus and the disciples been doing for the last 40 days? Who here has been behind a desk the last 40 days? Yeah? Both adults? I have, especially the last 2 weeks in my doctorate courses, our high school students, our preschool students that have graduated, those that have finished from places such as Hilltop and are moving on, those that are graduating from kindergarten to preschool. Graduates, right? For the last 40 days, there has been a cram school in place for Jesus and his disciples. He has taught and walked with them for 3 years, and on the other side of Easter, he says, okay, for the next 40 days, I'm going to pour it all into you. See, Jesus has fully entered into his role as a rabbi, not just as a teacher, but as a mentor, as a friend. And the disciples that were once merely those he had called and knew their name of have become his friends, his compatriots. They have become his students, his apprentices, and so much more. You see, they have been learning in their head all the knowledge they can. Who here has maybe had learned so much in such a short period your brain has hurt before a test before, right? It's there. They're in cramming. They're trying to learn and remember everything. But it's not just about being a student. It's also about being an apprentice. An apprentice is one that doesn't just take the knowledge. It's one that works alongside of their teacher, practicing their skills as they're learning, so that one day they can carry on the work of their teacher. It's about learning, it's about moving, and it's about a moment in which they graduate from being disciples into being full leaders of what they have been gifted with. The knowledge, the skills, the actions. And this weekend, we remember their graduation and the ascension from Christ. That moment in which Jesus says, okay, my friends, my students, my disciples, I believe in you enough to say, you got this. And then he goes to be with heaven and promises to send them that one missing piece, that one element in which they need to succeed at all that stands before them. The gift of God's loving Spirit in their life. A gift each and every one of us holds today. But as John pointed out, when he goes up, they're left kind of standing there. What's next? What happens after graduation? Do we just get back in our cars and go home and sit for a second? What happens after graduation? Do we go back to the bleachers and sit down? Do we go out to parties with our friends? Do we celebrate? Do we just stop and cease and stay in that moment forever? We stay there for a time because that time is a threshold moment of holy ground. There's a pause in the disciples' journey. A pause in which there is waiting, there is remembering, there is joy, and there is prayer. There's a pause because as they walked up the hill of the Mount of Olives to this point, they had an opportunity to remember everything that they had been traversed with in the last several months. They walked past the temple of God on the mount. They walked past the staircase in which Jesus was led to the high priest's house in which he was imprisoned. They walked past the garden in which he prayed, the Garden of Gethsemane, prayed and gave himself over. They walked past the crowds, the joyful celebrations. They walked out of the city into the hillside in which there were surroundings of cemeteries and gravestones looking upon the Temple Mount. They walked past all of it, and they remembered all that had been with Jesus, all that was still happening, and all that would be. They walked past because this was the world of the disciples for the last several months. And they remembered every story of the last several years. You'll see a large golden dome. That sits now right where the Temple Mount stood. And there's a valley that goes down from the dome, and then up into the right-hand corner of this picture, you'll see a large tower, and it is right near that tower the Chapel of Ascension rests. This hill is known as the Mount of Olives. It's a holy place for Israel. It is the place in which has been promised that when the Messiah comes again, he will set foot on the top of that mountain, and it will split from top to bottom, and a way for the people of Israel will be made through the gap. It's a promise from Zechariah. It's a place in which at the very bottom there's an olive grove that has trees that have been alive for thousands of years. Because an olive tree never dies, it can always be reborn from itself. There's a church, there's a temple, there's a graveside in which all the graves, every last one of them, is pointed at the mountain, the Temple Mount, at the gateway, the eastern gate, waiting and longing because of the promise that when the Messiah comes, he will enter through it. And they are so hopeful that they are just waiting for the day they can open their eyes and follow their Lord one more time. This place is holy ground. It's a place in which holds the joyful memories and the hurtful ones, the moments in which friends have stood with you and moments in which you have been betrayed, times of great celebration which thousands have gathered, and times in which you have felt all alone. Every student of every school has had that moment. all of these moments, in which the world is encompassed in a small part of land, and we spend all of our days and our nights working and learning and growing alongside others. And then comes the moment in which we are asked to do something new, to go somewhere new. And that is the moment of the blessing over the journey. You see, Jesus knew all of this and walked with his disciples just as he walks with our graduates today. And he is going to offer them a blessing before they leave. It's a blessing over the journey he knows life will take them on. It's a blessing over all that was and all that will be. And there's a special phrase that happens, and it's recorded differently in every gospel and in the book of Acts. It's a blessing in which God says, you have known all that I'm going to teach you, and so I'm going to ask you, go therefore into the nations, giving witness, teaching what I have shared, and sharing the love I've asked you to do through the new commandment of loving one another. He says, go therefore to all the nations. It's a funny word, and the translation is lost upon us. What it actually means is where your feet take you. Wherever your feet take you. Go. Go there and share the love of God. You see, some of the disciples were called to far-off lands. Some of them were called to more education. Some of them were called on roads. Some of them were called to make sacrifices. Some of them were called to stay right where they came from, in the city of Jerusalem. And wherever they were to share the love of God, the teachings of Christ. We have graduates all around us in this valley. We have a huge high school just beside us. And their feet are going to travel across this country and possibly this world. Some of them will stay right here close to home, and some will go away to where only God knows they will be led. And wherever they go, as they go, they are called to be a blessing to this world. To have the love they have felt pour out from them and to those people they have yet to meet. They are called to and in all the world. Between the Temple Mount and between the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives, as I said, there's a valley. And right at the base of that valley, there's a threshold. To the left, you'll see the grove of olive trees in which Jesus prayed. And here you'll see a large building. As the disciples came down from the hilltop, they entered into this valley. And it was a time in which they remembered that Jesus gave himself for the world through prayer. And they have been asked to give themselves to the world through blessing. It's a valley in which they remember how far the blessing is going to take them, and the presence of God has already brought them. The love of God took them, supported them, and is sending them. This is called the church to all the nations. It's a place in which the disciples and everyone around the world gather today and remember that it's bigger than we think. The whole world, the whole mission, the whole love is broader than we know, and every single graduate has an opportunity to step forth into this world and make a difference. To share a blessing, to share a hope, to share a word, to be inspired, to grow, to love, and to lead others. It is an opportunity in which we send them off just as Jesus did, with the knowledge that they are capable of more than we think possible. That they are gifted beyond our understanding, and they are led by a presence that supports them always and everywhere. The disciples are transitioning to become a people known as the church. A church to all the nations. Our graduates today are becoming a people of the future. A people of a next generation. Leaders in our midst that we will one day stand in awe of. And so I want to take a moment and offer a blessing to them, just as Jesus offered a blessing to his disciples, to his students. For God is with us always, even today.